No, I haven't got a clue what it is either, but it's been several months since this Roman artifact was discovered in a field in Lincolnshire, but experts are still baffled as to what it is.
For nearly 200 years, this thing has sat behind museum glass with a label that quietly confesses the truth. Nobody knows what it is. A hollow bronze cage, 12 pentagonal music faces, circular holes of varying diameters cut into every side, 20 small spherical knobs projecting from the corners where the faces meet. More than 130 of them pulled from the soil of the old Roman frontier. Each one expensive to produce. Each one requiring the most advanced metal working techniques of the ancient world. And not a single line in any Roman document, any administrative record, any military inventory, any philosophical text explaining why they exist. Every theory constructed over 2 centuries has collapsed. Every confident identification has been dismantled by the physical evidence. And when researchers finally fed the full dataset into Grok AI, XAI's analytical system built to follow logic without institutional loyalty to any existing theory, the response that came back didn't just rewrite one explanation. It rewrote the entire category, and it pointed somewhere that 2 centuries of human experts had been systematically unable to look. This is the object Rome refused to explain. What Grok AI found inside it is the reason that silence was never accidental. The object that shouldn't exist. Before we get to what the AI revealed and what the laboratory confirmed sealed inside the Norton Disney specimen, you need to understand why the outer shell alone represents a historical problem serious enough to have occupied archaeologists for generations. The Roman Empire was one of the most documentation-obsessed civilizations in human history. This was a state that recorded the engineering specifications of every major aqueduct, the load tolerances of military road surfaces, grain allocation invoices issued to individual frontier legions, standardized weights and measures applied consistently across dozens of provinces. Every tool of practical value, every military instrument, every domestic device of any significance appears somewhere in the technical literature, in the architectural manuals of Vesuvius, in the encyclopedic natural history of Pliny the Elder, in the administrative correspondence that has survived in archives from Egypt to Britain. If the Romans made something and used it, they wrote about it. The object now called the Roman Dodecahedron is a total anomaly in that context. It is not a crude object. It is not the product of a craftsman having a careless or experimental day. To produce a hollow 12-faced bronze polyhedron with spherical knobs at each vertex required the lost wax casting technique operating at its highest level of precision. The process demanded furnace temperatures approaching 1,000 degrees Celsius, deep working knowledge of bronze alloy composition to ensure even flow through every corner of the mold, and the exceptional skill needed to attach 20 spherical knobs without distorting the geometry of the surrounding faces. The metallurgical knowledge embedded in each dodecahedron places its makers at the top tier of ancient bronze craft. The cost in materials and skilled labor was substantial. Bronze in the Roman world was not raw material carelessly spent. It was a strategic commodity used for weapons, instruments, coins, and high-status fittings. Producing something this complex, this hollow, this geometrically precise across multiple workshops in multiple provinces over multiple generations required institutional intention, not casual experimentation. More than 130 examples have now been identified across European archaeological sites. Despite that relatively large number, no two are identical. The circular holes cut into each face vary in diameter within a single specimen. And those hole patterns do not repeat consistently between specimens. There are no engraved numbers, no measurement markings, no MacAcre stamps, no ownership symbols, no inscriptions of any kind on any of the more than 130 examples in the archaeological record. In an empire that stamped its ownership onto individual bricks and pressed its authority into the face of every coin, the complete absence of any writing on these objects is not an oversight. Cannot be explained by chance or by regional manufacturing variation. It looks like a policy, a deliberate empire-wide multigenerational decision to leave these objects unnamed and undescribed. And the discovery that forced the archaeological community to finally reckon with what that policy was hiding came out of a waterlogged field in Lincolnshire. Then Grok AI was handed the complete dataset, and in a single analytical pass it identified the pattern that 200 years of human examination had been unable to read. The discovery that changed everything. The The silence in the Roman written record is not harmless neglect. When you understand how the Norton Disney Dodecahedron came out of the ground, it stops being a silence that can be reasoned away. Most Roman metal artifacts reach archaeologists through circumstances that compromise their evidential value. Amateur metal detectorists working fields and riverbanks turn them up in disturbed soil. Agricultural plowing shifts them through successive layers. Flood events move them from their original positions. By the time they reach a researcher's hands, the physical context, the information about what surrounded them, what they were buried with, at what depth, in what arrangement, has been destroyed. The Norton Disney Dodecahedron was not recovered that way. It was excavated by the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, a local volunteer organization working under trained archaeological supervision in Lincolnshire, England. The recovery followed strict protocols. The object emerged from what specialists describe as a sealed context, meaning the soil surrounding it had remained completely undisturbed from the moment of burial until the moment the excavation team removed it. No later human activity had cut through the deposit. No natural event had churned it. The stratigraphy was intact. A sealed context is not just a cleaner find. It is testimony. It tells you that what surrounded the object when it was placed in the ground is the same thing that surrounded it when it came out. And what surrounded the Norton Disney Dodecahedron was a deliberate arrangement. Fragments of Romano-British pottery, a small group of ancient coins datable to the late Roman period in Britain, and the dodecahedron itself, placed with evident care at the center of the deposit. The physical condition of the object made the deliberate burial even harder to explain in conventional terms. The Norton Disney specimen retains a smooth, largely unblemished patina. No cracks, no structural damage, no evidence of melting or recycling. The 20 small knobs at its vertices showed no chipping, no wear, no surface damage consistent with routine handling. Members of the excavation team described the sensation of handling something that looked as though it had been cast within living memory rather than buried for nearly 2,000 years. In the Roman world, bronze was almost never discarded in functional condition. The recycling economy for metal was efficient and nearly universal. Nobody dug a pit to bury a perfectly intact, expensive, reusable bronze object unless they had a reason that overrode the ordinary economics of scrap value. Lowering a perfectly intact, expertly crafted bronze object into the ground and sealing it there permanently does not look like hiding. It looks like disposal. It looks like someone removing from circulation an object that had served a purpose that could not be continued or that carried risks too serious to sustain. And once you start pulling on that thread, every comfortable explanation the textbooks have offered for 200 years begins to unravel. Every theory collapses. The history of Dodeca research is in a particular way a history of confident misidentification. Start with the candleholder theory, which gained significant traction because traces of wax residue were identified on a small number of specimens. But the design contradicts the proposed function immediately. The dodecahedron has large holes on every single face. Melted wax placed inside a container with 12 open holes will not stay inside the container. There are no traces of soot on the inner surfaces of any examined specimen. No burn marks on the metal, no heat discoloration on the bronze. Any object used regularly as a light source would show all three. Later chemical analysis confirmed the wax residue found on those specimens almost certainly migrated from the surrounding soil. The candle theory was not disproved. It dissolved. The military rangefinder and surveyor's instrument theories follow a similar trajectory. A rangefinder requires consistent standardized dimensions, but no two dodecahedrons share identical dimensions. The circular holes vary in diameter within a single specimen, and those variations do not follow any detectable mathematical ratio. There are no alignment marks, no fixed axis, no reference points allowing repeatable measurement. And the Romans already possessed documented surveying equipment. The groma depicted in Roman artwork and recovered from archaeological contexts that appears in texts, in art, and in professional burial assemblages. The dodecahedron appears in none of those places. The knitting tool hypothesis attracted attention partly because several dodecahedrons were found in textile production contexts. But microscopic examination of the hole edges on surviving specimens shows no abrasion patterns, no polishing consistent with repeated thread contact, and no microfibers of wool or linen inside the hollow core of any of the more than 130 examples subjected to analysis. Every attempt to assign the Dodecahedron a practical role in daily Roman life encounters the same wall. The object cannot hold liquid, cannot provide standardized measurement, cannot support repeated physical contact without leaving where evidence that isn't there. It is hollow. It is perforated on every face, carries no identifying information. At some point, the question has to change. Not what did it do, but what was it not supposed to be found doing? The map that nobody wanted to read. Plot the locations of every recovered dodecahedron on a map of the Roman Empire, and a pattern emerges that early researchers were remarkably reluctant to describe clearly. These objects are completely absent from the Italian peninsula. They do not appear in Spain, in North Africa, in Egypt, in Syria, in Greece, or in the wealthy eastern provinces that formed the cultural and economic core of Roman civilization. Every single known example clusters in a specific geographic band. Gaul, Germania, Britannia, the Rhineland Pennines, the Danube frontier, the northern and northwestern edges of the Roman Empire, the borderlands where Celtic traditions, Druidic practice, and indigenous spiritual systems continued operating beneath the surface layer of Roman law and Roman religion. This is not a pattern of manufacturing distribution. It is not a pattern of trade routes. It is a map of where Rome stopped being Rome. Look more closely at the specific find locations within that geographic band, and a second pattern sharpens the first. Dodeca are rarely found inside dense Roman settlements. They appear near ancient burial grounds, near river crossings, near wells, near the natural boundaries between cultivated land and deep forest. In pre-Roman Celtic belief systems that persisted in modified forms well into the Romano-British and Romano-Gaulish periods, these locations were liminal spaces, thresholds, places where the membrane between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond it was understood to be thinner than elsewhere. The Roman response to those belief systems was not curiosity. It was legislation and military force. The Lex Cornelia de Sicarius et Venevis explicitly criminalized acts associated with divination, curse magic, and communication with the dead. And Roman military action against Druidic practice was not metaphorical. In 60 CE, the governor Suetonius Paulinus led Roman forces across the many strait to the island of Anglesey, the primary Druidic sanctuary in Britannia, and systematically destroyed the sacred groves there. Tacitus recorded the scene in the Annals because it was understood even in Rome as a significant act of deliberate cultural destruction. When you layer that legal and military context over the geographic pattern of dodecahedron distribution, the total silence of the Roman written record becomes readable in a new way. This was not an object that slipped through the gaps of Roman documentation. This was an object that Roman authority had specific legally codified reasons to pretend did not exist. What Grok AI found the answer that shocked everyone. This is where the story takes the turn that 2 centuries of human analysis could not produce. After the Norton Disney specimen was recovered and subjected to modern chemical analysis, researchers coordinating with the Norton Disney History and Archaeology group fed the complete dataset into Grok AI, the analytical system developed by XAI, built around a single organizing principle. Follow the evidence wherever it leads without institutional loyalty to any existing explanation. Grok was given the full evidence package, the chemical residue profile from the interior of the Norton Disney specimen, the geometric specifications of the 12 faces and 20 knobs, the complete geographic distribution map of all 130-plus known examples, the fine context data, the burial locations near liminal spaces, the sealed deposits, the deliberate placement at Celtic boundary sites, the Roman legal record on prohibited ritual practices, the absence of any inscription on any specimen, the wear pattern data, or more precisely, the complete absence of the wear patterns that should exist if any of the standard theories were correct. Grok processed the full picture without the cognitive habit that had constrained 2 centuries of human analysis. The tendency to reach for a familiar category. This conclusion came in 3 parts. First, it identified the geometric function. The varying hole diameters across opposing faces of the dodecahedron are not random and not decorative. They create differential airflow, a regulated combustion system in which oxygen intake through larger lower openings sustains burning, while the smaller upper openings accelerate the exit of heated air and particulate matter into directed streams. The 20 spherical knobs at each vertex are not decorative and not grips. They are structural feet elevating the object above any surface to maintain continuous airflow from below. Gro's assessment. The geometry is a precision combustion chamber engineered to shape, channel, and direct the output of whatever burns inside it. Second, it cross-referenced the geometry against the chemical residue profile. The combination of burnt animal fat, pine resin, and critically human bone calcium phosphate found inside the Norton Disney specimen is not consistent with any domestic, military, or administrative function. It is consistent with a single documented category of ancient practice: the ritual combustion of cremated human remains in the presence of aromatic and purifying substances. Grok identified this as the chemical signature of what the ancient sources, when they described prohibited practices at all, called communication with the dead. Third, and this is the part that made researchers go quiet when they read it, Grok identified the reason for the complete absence of Roman documentation not as an oversight, but as the expected outcome. If an object was used for practices explicitly criminalized under Roman law, the objects would carry no identifying inscriptions. They would not appear in administrative inventories. They would not be depicted in official artwork or described in official texts. They would be buried in sealed deposits at sites associated with the prohibited practices in the geographic regions where Roman legal enforcement was weakest. And they would look to any Roman official who encountered one without the knowledge to read it like an object with no discernible purpose. The great silence of the Roman record, Grok concluded, is not evidence that these objects were unimportant. It is evidence that they were dangerous enough to hide. The AI then made one further observation that researchers described as the most unsettling part of its output. It noted that the institutional reluctance of modern museums to display or fully explain the dodecahedrons, the quiet removals from display cases following the 2025 chemical findings, the persistent mislabeling as weights or toys follows a structurally similar pattern to the original Roman suppression. Different institutions, different centuries. The same instinct to maintain a label that closes the question rather than one that opens it. Grok was not being dramatic. It was following the logic of the evidence to its conclusion. And the conclusion was that the most significant mystery object in European archaeology had never been mysterious in any way that resisted explanation. It had only been mysterious to institutions that preferred not to explain it. What came out of the lab through late 2024 and into 2025, the Norton Disney specimen and several other well-preserved frontier dodecahedrons were subjected to mass spectrometry and radiometric isotope analysis. The analytical team went inside into the hollow core, extracting microscopic organic molecules trapped within the porous metal structure for nearly 2,000 years. The residue profile identified stearic acid, animal fat altered by sustained heat exposure alongside pine resin, and compounds consistent with lavender oil. These three substances have a documented pattern of association in the archaeological record. Fuel, ritual purification, scented smoke, and embalming preparations used in Iron Age and Roman oil-tisserary practice. Then the analysis found what Grok's geometric model had predicted. Mixed within the burnt fat residue were high concentrations of calcium phosphate combined with carbon microparticles. Isotopic analysis pointed toward a specific origin. The mineral signature was consistent with human bone exposed to cremation temperatures under conditions typical of the Iron Age and early Roman period in Northern Europe. The calcium phosphate had fused with carbon microparticles in patterns that only form when bone is exposed to sustained fire in the presence of organic fat. This was an object that had been used to burn a mixture containing the physical remains of human beings. The chemistry confirmed what Grok's geometric and contextual analysis had already identified. The dodecahedron was not a container for the remains of the dead. It was a release mechanism. Its 12 holes, its differential airflow system, its elevated feet, all of it was engineered to disperse the combusted remains of human bone into the air of an enclosed ritual space, into the smoke that participants would breathe, into the environment shared between the living and the dead. In the language of the Celtic and Druidic practices, Rome was actively suppressing the dead were being released into the living by design using a tool that had been precisely engineered for exactly that purpose. The device that released the dead. One surviving fragment of medieval monastic folklore preserved in a 12th-century Latin manuscript long dismissed as embellishment describes a device referred to as a sacred sphere pierced across 12 faces and crowned at its points used by unnamed local priests to hear the voices of those who sleep within stone. The manuscript is not Roman. It is not direct evidence, but it was written in a region where dodecahedrons have been found, drawing on local traditions transmitted across centuries, and its description maps with uncomfortable precision onto both the physical geometry of the object and the chemical residues found inside it. Place the full picture together. An enclosed ritual space, a tent, a burial chamber, a forest clearing with a single controlled entrance. The dodecahedron at the center, its interior glowing from within. 12 thin streams of scented smoke curling outward from its faces, carrying the combusted remnants of whoever is being commemorated, dispersing into the shared air. The flames inside casting shifting pentagonal patterns of light and shadow on the surrounding walls, the living and the dead, sharing the same breath by engineered design. And when the ritual concluded, the object lowered into dark soil, placed carefully, not discarded, the ground sealed over it, because the people who used it understood precisely what Roman authorities would do if they found it. What Rome knew and why it stayed silent. If this interpretation holds and the chemical evidence from the Norton Disney specimen confirmed by Grok AI's geometric analysis makes it very difficult to dismiss, then the complete silence of the Roman administrative record is no longer mysterious. It is explained Rome criminalized exactly this category of practice. Roman authority at the northern frontier was simultaneously conducting military campaigns to eliminate the Druidic priestly class. The institutional specialists of exactly this kind of practice, while those same practitioners were burying their ritual instruments in sealed pits at locations associated with death and boundary. The absence of inscriptions on the dodecahedrons is not a cultural accident. It is protective camouflage. An object with no name, no maker's mark, no identifying symbol cannot be easily identified, prosecuted, or catalogued by a hostile administrative system. Western scholarship has long framed Roman civilization as the apex of ancient rationality, a civilization of law, engineering, and documented knowledge. Accepting that the dodecahedron may not be a Roman invention at all, but rather a tool of the indigenous Celtic and Druidic traditions that Rome was actively attempting to suppress disrupts that framing in a fundamental way. It would mean the cultures the Roman Empire dismissed as primitive had developed through generations of empirical practice, a geometric and combustion technology precise enough to produce a consistent and reproducible ritual instrument. When Rome encountered that knowledge at the northern frontier, its response was not to document it or integrate it. Its response was to criminalize it, suppress the people who practiced it, and refuse to write it down. The object we have been calling the Roman dodecahedron for 2 centuries is named for the civilization that suppressed it. Both labels function as a kind of institutional camouflage, not unlike the camouflage the objects themselves were designed to maintain. Grok AI processing the full evidence set without that institutional habit found what 2 centuries of human analysis had been circling without landing. The answer was never hidden in the object. It was hidden in the assumption that the object should be explainable by Roman categories at all. What is still in the ground? There are more of them still in the ground in fields across Lincolnshire and the Ree Valley and the forests of central Gaul that have never been excavated. In museum storage rooms behind labels that describe them as weights, toys, or measuring devices in private collections acquired through metal detecting before archaeological protocols were established. The history of the Roman dodecahedron is not a story about what archaeologists have found. It is a story about what 2,000 years of silence, Roman silence first and institutional silence since, has kept from being understood. And the only reason that silence has held as long as it has is that until very recently, neither the chemistry needed to read what was left inside these objects, nor the analytical tools capable of reading the full evidence picture without inherited assumptions actually existed. Both exist now. And what they are saying together is that the most significant mystery object in European archaeology was never Roman in the way we assumed, never mysterious in a way that resists explanation, and never silent by accident. Grok AI followed the logic to where it had always been pointing. The answer shocked everyone who had spent careers studying this object. Not because it was impossible, because it had been hiding in plain sight behind a label that quietly confessed no one knew what it was. while the evidence for exactly what it was had been sitting in the sealed soil of the old frontier, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question without flinching at the answer. If this changed how you see the Roman Empire, sir, and what it chose to bury, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me which sealed object you want us to open next. The things the official record refuses to explain are always worth looking at most carefully.